Awesome. Welcome everyone to our third episode of the ASH GBS series. My name is Omar Shahid. I'm the president of Advocate Health. And today we'll be chatting with our special guest, Donna Hartlen, a GBS survivor and the executive director of the GBS/CIDP Foundation of Canada. So we're collaborating with Donna on a series of virtual events to help spread awareness on GBS, with our current event being the case competition. So for more information on that, you can check out our Instagram at Advocate Health. Submission and sign-in forms are up for that. So before we get started on some of our questions, please tell our listeners a bit about your background and experience with GBS, Donna.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Omar. So I'm currently the executive director of GBS CIDP Foundation of Canada. I started off as a volunteer in 2013 and took over the ED position in the fall of 2013. So I've been around for over 8 years now. I'm actually a Guillain-Barre survivor. I had GBS back in December of 2009 and got over my GBS. And my story is a little complicated because down the line I became chronic and I was given a diagnosis of CIDP later on. But my first event was definitely Guillain-Barre Syndrome.
Okay, yeah. Tell us a bit about how you got diagnosed with GBS. How was that experience overall? Yeah.
So one of the hardest things for Guillain-Barre syndrome is a recognition of symptoms. And, a lot of people know about Alzheimer's, a lot of people know about ALS, a lot of people know about MS. But although rare, Guillain-Barre syndromes, 1 to 2 in 100,000 people get diagnosed a year.
Right.
So it sounds really rare, but actually once you've had Guillain-Barre syndrome, you realize quite a few people have had some form of an experience with it. So my symptoms, I actually, we all know the pandemic that we're in, COVID-19. So my experience started with another pandemic, which was the H1N1. You would have been a kid at the time.
Yep.
And there was a big vaccine campaign that was going on at that time. And I had the H1N1 shot. I was planning to fly for a Christmas vacation down to Halifax and had the H1N1 shot. And 13 days later, actually on Boxing Day, started to experience some really odd feelings like severe back pain. Like I've never had back pain in my entire life and a really bad headache. And it progressed to sort of my throat not feeling right, but I thought I was getting sick, not GBS, right? I thought, okay, so maybe I have the flu. And I felt I was having to get in a bathtub every 2-3 hours just to deal with the pain in my back. It was so excruciating. And I found out later that was my immune system after my vaccine shot had gone into overdrive and started to attack my nervous system. So Guillain-Barre is, it's a disorder of the peripheral nerves. So it's outside the brain and spinal cord. But the thing is in order to move your finger or to talk or to breathe, you need the peripheral nervous system. So mine went into overdrive and started to attack the outside of my nerves. And I had a tingling tongue and a whole bunch of stuff. At the time, my kids were only 4 and 2. And on the 27th, I think it was, I bent down to change my daughter's diaper on the floor at my mom's house, and I couldn't get off the floor. So it was at that time, I was calling, we all have it, the health lines, the 211 telehealth lines.
Yep.
They were just telling me I had the flu. But at that point, I knew something was seriously wrong. So we went to the ER, and because it was H1N1, they put me in flu isolation and they put me in a room all by myself. They thought that maybe that was it, and took 10 hours to be seen. I was lucky. There was an ER doctor that noticed that what I was talking about or trying to explain. It's really hard to explain. I'll get there. But anyway, I started to explain how I was feeling and what happened. And she had seen Guillain-Barre before. I was really lucky. They called in an on-call neurologist and they came in, they did a spinal tap to check protein fluids in my spinal cord, which sees an increase in proteins, and I was dramatically getting worse by the hour. So at that point, when the neurologist came in, I could no longer feel a single part on my body. When he poked me with the pin, I could feel nothing. And I didn't even realize that numbness was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And he started me on intravenous immunoglobulin, which is one of the treatments for Guillain-Barre, at 2:30 in the morning before the CF tests even came back for my spinal fluid. And that was just the start. I still continued to go downhill over several days. I lost the use of my legs, my arms, my breathing started to decline, but it didn't go crazy. I'm claustrophobic. I laid in a bed and said, keep breathing, keep breathing, keep breathing, keep breathing for like days. It was terrible. And eventually I lost the use of my face. So I had to tape my eyelids shut. I was having some autonomic nervous system, and autonomic nerves, for people that don't know, those are those ones that just get your blood pressure regulated, your bladder works. And my blood pressure was crazy. So if I stood up, I would pass out. And there was just a lot of crazy stuff. I spent 3 months in hospital, went through rehabilitation to learn how to walk again and drive again and smile again. Had to go through speech therapy and a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah. We've talked to some previous survivors too, and it was a very, very similar experience. And like, I think like the most like scary part for them was like when the symptoms sort of started like increasing in severity at like such a short amount of time, and you don't like really know what to do, especially like when you're in a system where the doctors or the ERs don't really know what GBS is. Like that is even like it becomes like really stressful. So but when people went for the rehab and all that, they took a lot of lessons out of it too, I heard, like in terms of like having a positive mindset and like not taking like your health for granted and stuff. So like yeah, there were very, very unique experiences as well. So I'm just wondering, throughout all this experience, what was like your motivation? What kept you like going basically like all the way to the end?
My kids were 4 and 2. I
Yeah.
couldn't be in a hospital for months on end. It truly was what got me out of there. And my willpower, I had no time for Guillain-Barre. That's how I looked at it. Had no time for it, had to get home. And here's a funny thing. I was on vacation. I wasn't even in Ontario where I live. I was in Halifax in a hospital. So that created some complications as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Omar,
yeah.
Is there any way we could pause the recording for 2 seconds? My Mac is flashing like crazy. Is there any way we could edit it and pull it back together?
Yeah, all good. I can just keep going. Like, let me see if I can pause it. All right, guys, we're back. Just a small technical difficulty. So yeah, we were just talking about Donna's experience with GBS. So yeah, she was saying her most motivating factor were her kids, and she did not like the way she looked at it was like she didn't really have time for GBS. So that was how it is. And you mentioned you were on vacation too, so that was also another big thing. I remember when I was talking to one of the first survivors we met. He was traveling across the world, just going to different hospitals just to see who would know what GBS is and stuff. So yeah, it's an experience for sure.
So because I lost my ability to move my face, and I didn't mention I had throat paralysis as well, so I could no longer chew and swallow food well. Because of that, I was told if I wouldn't have been diagnosed early and very quickly by the ER doc, I would have been on respiratory support. I was headed there. And it was through that really quick call to that on-call neurologist that probably saved me a few more months in hospital. Because once you're in ICU, it's just so much more rehabilitation later because you have so much muscle mass. So I was told I had an 80% chance to be on respiratory, which is scary, especially if you're claustrophobic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
No, that's
I've even heard like when it came to COVID and stuff, a lot of people were claustrophobic, and when they had to be shifted to ICU, they were trying to like go back to the normal unit, and they were like, no, there's nothing we can do. Like, you have to go on respiratory, and they were like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of PTSD that comes with respiratory support. Or a lot of our patients live with that. Even myself, even though I didn't get there, I've been quadriplegic 4 times now. It's not fun. You do, like, if you get a sniffle or you get sick or you get some sort of funky infection or something like that, or food poisoning, I mean, your brain automatically goes to that hospital. Like, you don't want to see that again, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of our patients live with having to deal with that for the rest of their lives. Yeah. So I can see how COVID would translate. Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So also coming back to just GBS in general in terms of like information, have you heard of any like misconceptions or myths about GBS that like maybe you want to like bring to the floor?
Misconceptions, or it's definite. Okay, here's some things. We see health professionals that think once they give immunoglobulin, it's going to be this immediate cure, because they don't know that GBS stands for getting better slowly. So when you have these nerves, they only grow 1 millimeter a day. So
Right.
just because you're giving IVIG, if you've got someone that's not walking, it's not, a lot of treatments or a lot of things could be, could be a big turnaround in a day or two. You may see some patients that maybe didn't have a lot of severe damage quite yet. And you may see a pretty good reaction, but it's still not like immediate. So no, IVIG doesn't save the day within hours. You still have a long road after that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense too. Yeah, especially like from like the patient's perspective too. Like seeing how like quickly the symptoms became so severe and stuff, they would like think like if there's even a treatment out there, it would be like something they expect would be like really fast recovery. But I guess it just comes with the experience, knowing that like it's a slow process, and it takes time, even for like from the physician's perspective too. But I'm sure that like what about like if the physician was an expert on GBS, like is there like a way to like tell the patients, or like how does that work, the physician and patient interaction? Like
So there's different levels that we get involved with, actually, like, if you have a problem with your eyes, you go to the ophthalmologist or whatever. So, but for us, I mean, when we go into a hospital, we hit ER. Then what happens is we usually have neurologists look at us from a treatment point of view. But then once you're treated, we now leave that space, and now we're into a rehabilitation space, right?
Right.
So when it comes to explaining it, I think really, and it's funny, we just had one of our doctors the other day. We have some videos up on our website if anybody wants to take a look. The one on CIDP is not that far off from GBS from the point of view of neuropathy is not well known, right? Like, or polyneuropathy is not well known. So when you're talking about peripheral nerves and the damage that can happen, like our doctors say, you have to educate the public about what a peripheral nerve is first.
Right. Yeah.
Like, everybody knows what a brain is, and everybody knows what a spinal cord is. And if, someone gets in a severe accident and their spinal cord is severed, you know exactly what's going to happen. But there's not a lot of knowledge about the neurons, the length of neurons that go from a spine down to your tips of your fingers. And as they say, it's a really long conversation, but maybe we can shorten it somehow. I think that's a good, like we always say, that you have electrical lines. It's your electrical system. It's like you're wiring in your house. And when our system attacks those wires, it chews off that rubber coating that's on the wire. The axon is the copper you see in your electrical cord, and the myelin is that
myelin sheath. Yeah.
And it's, if you took a fork, don't do it while you got live electricity, and you started poking at it, eventually electricity is not going to get through that line. And that's exactly what it is. It's like, you got to explain that it's a cable, explain that you're destroying the cable, and that now your brain can't get the message through the cable.
Mm.
Or you could talk about a coax cable if you want. Depends on who you're talking to.
Right.
Most people understand more along the lines of electrical wiring, and they can understand that, right? Or a telephone wire.
Mm-hmm.
The whole network's not going to hear you if the wire's cut.
Yep. Analogies really help work out the explanations and stuff like that. Yeah, that's something like I feel like the medical system like should work on in the future, like when it comes to especially like rare diseases that are like super complicated to explain, when you have to have like a basic foundation of like the general stuff like peripheral nerves. So having analogies, like maybe stories or something like that, makes it super easy to understand it.
That's right.
That's really important. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so just one last thing I wanted to touch upon was like your work in the GBS, in the foundation itself. So can you tell our listeners and viewers like how we could get involved in terms of advocacy for this? Like, what does the foundation offer for like volunteers?
So we are a growing foundation. We've grown a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. So we have 4 pillars that have support, which typically is done by patients and families that have gone through one of our conditions. Because as I said, we cover Guillain-Barre Syndrome, but their cousins are also chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, which is exactly the same mechanism as GBS, except it's chronic. And then we have multifocal motor neuropathy as well. And those fall under our umbrella. So usually we have patients and family members will support patients that have been recently diagnosed or need ongoing support. Maybe they're having flares, flare-ups. They need support. They've got long-term residuals. And this is the other, I think I'm going to go back a little before I move on, because one of the misconceptions about Guillain-Barre syndrome is that you recover fully, and we don't. We don't. And even children that seem to recover fully, later in life, 30 years, 40 years later, when you're starting to age and you get to my age, early 50s, you're going in towards your 60s, and our health is declining just because we're aging, some of those residuals start to come out later in life. So we're not completely recovered. We recover quite well, so we can get back to life and work and be able to, most of us, some do not. So that's a misconception as well, is when you hear or you see in books that we fully recover, it's an immune-mediated disease of the peripheral nerves, but it doesn't mean they completely come back. And it depends on how much damage. So that's another misconception, but you don't want to scare patients when you're building awareness, that is a misconception. But we have that, and then we educate. So we have conferences where we actually educate our patients and family members about our conditions, whether it's treatments, whether it's the onset and explaining the mechanism behind the disease, or whether it's rehabilitation and those types of services that promote well-being. That's what we do. We also do have research grants. We've been looking to do grants this year. The cool thing as well is we have a Young Investigators Award. So for young students that are in university and sciences that are looking to get into research, get their abstracts out to, some of the medical association conferences and groups, we give out Young Investigator Awards to try to promote research in the space. And the last thing is advocacy. And in advocacy, we actually try to work with federal, provincial, and local jurisdictions to get the word out. And we do things like, like COVID is a good example. COVID vaccines, Guillain-Barre was listed as a possible trigger. And I should mention, I am a 1 in a million girl. That's who gets GBS from vaccines. I'm a 1 in a million. So it's not a lot, but it was there, and it hit the press because of that. But, we had to work with governments around vaccine injury programs. Our country didn't have one. We worked directly with federal government and Public Health Canada on that. And then we also look at things like what I was saying about the telehealth systems and trying to get their systems updated so that depending upon what symptoms go in there, Guillain-Barre could potentially come up. So you have an infection, and now all of a sudden I can't feel my hands and feet. Get to the emerge, mention to the emerge doctor, this could be Guillain-Barre, right? So stuff like that. We go to medical conferences. And then the other thing we do is we raise awareness walk and rolls. We have one coming up. We have 4 coming up this year, one in Vancouver, Calgary, Saskatoon, and Toronto. So we get out in the community and try to build awareness that way. So we just keep plugging along. and our volunteers help us with all of these things. And then we actually pull in volunteers that have certain skill sets as well that help us in the health community. So we have an occupational therapist that's a volunteer, a nurse that's a volunteer. We have an advisory board that is national that obviously helps us with all the things that we do to build awareness. Yep.
Yeah. No, those are a lot of cool things. Yeah. Especially like I really like your point about like the vaccine injury thing, like getting people to like know about it and like going straight to ER. I feel like that's like that would be really, really interesting if that becomes like a permanent thing.
That's
and then,
right.
like in the future and stuff. But yeah, it sounds like a lot of cool opportunities for even for students as well. So for those listening, please we'll link the foundation's website, and please go check it out. There are a lot of cool things you can get involved in. So yeah,
that's great. Okay. Any help we'll take.
Of course.
And any of you young science folks out there, you can come along and do some great work in peripheral nerve research.
Yeah, great opportunities there for sure. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's a wrap for this episode. So thank you so much, Donna, for giving us your valuable time today, as well as your experiences. We look forward to advocating for GBS alongside you and the rest of the foundation in the hopes of shining some light on rare diseases like GBS for our viewers and listeners. Thank you to all who are listening. Please feel free to read up on Donna's role in the foundation. We'll have it linked in our Instagram soon as well when this podcast gets released. And that's that. See you all next time.